The search dog sat down. In search and rescue, when a tracking dog sits, it means the trail has ended. The handler noted the location. 400 yards from the trailhead. Middle of a well-maintained path. Clear October morning. No rain in weeks. The dog had followed the scent from the parking lot without hesitation. Strong track. Confident animal. Then the dog stopped, circled twice, and sat. The handler walked the dog forward. Nothing. Walked it backward. The dog picked up the scent again, followed it to the same spot, and sat again. Somewhere on this trail, between the parking lot and this unremarkable bend in the path, a 34-year-old dental hygienist from Fresno had ceased to exist. Her name was Patricia Vance. That was October 2021. She has never been found. The trail register shows her signature at 9 in the morning. A hiker 15 minutes behind her saw no one. The search covered every drainage, every cliff band, every body of water within 5 miles. Nothing. This is not a documentary about people who wandered into the wilderness unprepared. This is not about hikers who made fatal navigation errors in remote backcountry. This is about people who vanished from places that should have been safe. Parking lots with other vehicles. Trailheads with regular traffic. Campgrounds full of families. Overlooks where tourists stood with cameras. They disappeared in crowds, and no one saw anything. The assumption we carry into wild places is that danger increases with distance from civilization. The deeper you go, the greater the risk. We prepare accordingly. We tell people our plans. We carry emergency devices. We stay on marked trails near popular areas. But what happens when the popular areas become the danger? What happens when someone vanishes from a parking lot in broad daylight? What happens when a child walks 50 yards to the family car and never arrives? 15 cases, 6 from verified records, 9 reconstructed from patterns documented across American wilderness. All of them disappeared from locations where other people were present. Some within sight of family members. Some from parking lots with a dozen other vehicles. Some from trails so popular that hikers passed every few minutes. The evidence in these cases does not support the official explanations. Something else is happening. David Lee Gonzalez was born in Lake Elsinore, California. He was small for his age, 3 feet 10 inches tall, 52 pounds. He had black hair, brown eyes, and was missing one front tooth. He spoke mostly Spanish and had a speech impediment that made communication difficult with strangers. His father, Jose, worked construction. His mother, Rosenda, raised David and his siblings in a small house in a working-class neighborhood. They were active members of their local church. When the church organized a camping trip to the San Bernardino Mountains for the last weekend of July 2004, the Gonzalez family signed up immediately. David had just turned 9. His birthday was July 20th. The camping trip was a belated celebration. His father wanted to show him the mountains. Hanna Flat Campground sits at 7,000 feet elevation in the San Bernardino National Forest, about 3 miles from Big Bear Lake. The campground has 88 sites spread across a mixed conifer forest of pine and cedar. During summer weekends, it fills completely. The July 4th holiday had passed, but the last weekend of the month still drew crowds escaping the desert heat below. The Gonzalez family arrived Friday evening with several other families from their church. They set up tents, started a fire, began the rituals of a weekend in the woods. By Saturday morning, July 31st, the campground was busy with activity. Breakfast smoke rose from dozens of sites. Children wandered between family groups. The parking area near the Gonzalez campsite held multiple vehicles. At approximately 8 in the morning, David asked his mother for the keys to the family truck. A Ford Explorer parked in the lot, maybe 50 yards from where Rosenda stood washing dishes. David wanted cookies. The box was locked in the vehicle. Rosenda handed him the keys. She watched him walk toward the parking lot. Other campers were visible in the area. Cars passed on the campground road. It was a normal Saturday morning at a busy campground. She turned to speak with another woman from the church group. A conversation lasting seconds. When she looked back toward the parking lot, David was not visible. She assumed he had reached the truck. She assumed he was getting his cookies. She continued her morning tasks. Minutes passed. David did not return. Rosenda walked to the parking lot. The Ford Explorer was locked. The cookies were inside, untouched. David was not at the vehicle. He was not anywhere in the parking area. The keys he had taken from her hand were gone. David was gone. She called his name. Other church members joined the search. They checked the bathrooms. They walked the campground roads. They looked behind every tent, every vehicle, every tree within shouting distance. Nothing. By 8:30, Rosenda called 911. San Bernardino County Sheriff deputies arrived within the hour. By noon, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. What happened next would become one of the largest searches in San Bernardino National Forest history. Over the following 9 days, more than 200 searchers combed the terrain surrounding Hannah Flat Campground. They used helicopters with thermal imaging. They deployed tracking dogs. They searched on foot, on horseback, on ATVs. They covered 8 miles in every direction from the campground. They logged over 9,000 man-hours. They interviewed every camper they could locate. They ran background checks on registered sex offenders in the area. They followed up on every tip, every reported sighting, every piece of information that came through the tip line. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a candy wrapper that David might have dropped. The tracking dogs could not establish a scent trail from the campground. It was as if David had never walked toward that parking lot at all. One detail emerged during the investigation that has never been explained. Rosenda told deputies that she saw a large beige truck speeding away from the campground area at approximately the time David disappeared. The truck was described as full-size, possibly with large tires, possibly carrying a motorcycle and quad in the bed. It was moving fast. Too fast for a campground. Authorities released this information publicly. They asked anyone who had been driving such a vehicle to come forward. No one did. The truck was never identified. The driver was never found. The sheriff department stated publicly that they did not suspect foul play. They believed David had wandered into the forest and become lost. The search continued on that assumption. But David was 9 years old, small for his age, with limited English and a speech impediment. He had walked 50 yards to get cookies. He had never reached the truck. The cookies were still locked inside. Where does a 9-year-old go in the few seconds between a parking lot and a truck 50 yards away? The search was officially called off on August 8, 2004. Rosenda Gonzalez had learned she was pregnant during the search. She stood with her husband at the final press conference, devastated, answering questions about a son who had simply ceased to exist. Cindy Beavers, the sheriff department spokesperson, delivered the official conclusion. "We still believe that David walked off into the forest and became lost. No explanation was offered for how a child could vanish from a busy campground parking lot without anyone seeing or hearing anything. No explanation was offered for the beige truck or its driver. No explanation was offered for why tracking dogs could not establish any scent trail." The case went cold. 9 months later, in April 2005, hikers discovered human remains in a ravine approximately 1 mile southwest of Hannah Flat Campground. The remains were skeletal, scattered, partial. A skull and some bones comprising roughly 25% of a complete skeleton. They were found at the base of a boulder formation, about 150 feet tall, near a seasonal stream bed. San Bernardino County coroner investigators recovered the remains and began the identification process. Dental records confirmed what the Gonzalez family had dreaded. The remains belonged to David. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The location was within the area that had been searched during those 9 days in August. Not the exact spot, perhaps, but the general vicinity. Searchers had covered that terrain. Helicopters had flown patterns overhead. Dogs had worked the area. How had David ended up there? Had he walked that far on his own? Had something or someone taken him there? The condition of the remains made determination of cause of death impossible. The coroner could not establish whether David had died from exposure, from a fall, from an animal attack, or from human violence. The bones showed no obvious trauma, but after 9 months of exposure to weather and scavengers, evidence of trauma might have been destroyed. Initially, California Department of Fish and Game suggested a mountain lion attack. A lion had been seen in the area around the time of the disappearance. Dogs had tracked lion scent through the campground. The sudden disappearance without sound or witness might be explained by a large predator. But when wildlife forensic experts examined the remains, they found no evidence of a predatory attack. No tooth marks consistent with a killing bite. No patterns of bone damage associated with how mountain lions consume prey. The experts saw evidence of scavenging, animals feeding on remains after death, but nothing to suggest a lion had killed David. Doug Updike, the same fish and game expert who had initially raised the lion theory, publicly abandoned it after viewing the forensic examination. "I did not see anything that implicated a mountain lion," he told reporters. So what did kill David Gonzalez? The official record offers no answer. The case remains open. The cause of death is listed as undetermined. The manner of death is listed as undetermined. A 9-year-old boy walked 50 yards across a crowded campground parking lot on a Saturday morning in July. He never reached the family truck. He was never seen alive again. His partial remains were found 9 months later in a ravine 1 mile away. The cookies were still in the truck. The keys were never found, and no one saw or heard anything. The obvious explanation is that David was abducted. The beige truck, the speed at which it left, the complete absence of any trail. Someone took him. The less obvious question is how. The campground was full. Over 100 people within shouting distance. David walked 50 yards in broad daylight. How does someone grab a child in those conditions without a single witness? The third possibility is one that investigators did not pursue publicly. What if David reached the truck? What if he unlocked it, got his cookies, and then walked somewhere else? What if the keys disappeared because they were with him when he left the parking lot a second time? There is no evidence for this scenario. But there is no evidence for any scenario. Just a missing child, partial remains, and questions that have never been answered. 13 years before David Gonzalez disappeared, another boy vanished under remarkably similar circumstances less than 20 miles away. Jared Michael Negrete was 12 years old in July of 1991. He lived in El Monte, California, with his parents Felipe and Linda. He was described as shy but friendly, a bit overweight, not particularly athletic. He wore glasses with brown plastic frames and had a small birthmark on his right cheek. Jared was an 8th grader and a member of Boy Scout Troop 538, sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When the troop organized an overnight backpacking trip to Mount San Gorgonio in the San Bernardino National Forest, Jared signed up for what would be his first extended wilderness experience. Mount San Gorgonio is the highest peak in Southern California, rising to 11,500 feet. The mountain is remote enough to feel like wilderness, but popular enough to see steady hiking traffic during summer months. The trails are well maintained. The terrain, while strenuous, is not technical. On July 20th, 1991, Jared and his troop hiked from the South Fork trailhead toward their base camp near Dollar Lake. The trail climbs through mixed conifer forest before opening into high alpine meadows dotted with seasonal wildflowers. It is a beautiful area. It is also a place where the weather can change rapidly and where the thin air makes exertion more difficult. Jared struggled on the ascent. He was not in peak physical condition, and the altitude affected him. He fell behind the rest of the group. At some point during the afternoon, the troop leaders realized Jared was no longer with them. The last person confirmed to have seen Jared Negrete alive was a firefighter who encountered him on the trail at approximately 6 in the evening. The firefighter later told investigators that Jared appeared tired, but otherwise okay. The firefighter warned him to stay on the trail and not to attempt any shortcuts. Jared said he understood. He was never seen again. When the scout troop realized Jared was not with them, they searched briefly and then hiked back toward base camp. The troop leader walked approximately 12 miles in darkness to reach a ranger station and report the missing boy. The search for Jared Negrete became one of the largest in California history at that time. Over the following 2 weeks, As many as 3,000 people logged 45,000 hours searching 50 square miles of the San Bernardino National Forest. Helicopters with infrared sensors flew patterns over the mountain. Dogs worked the trails and surrounding terrain. Marines were brought in to assist with ground coverage. On the second day, searchers found footprints at approximately 10,000 feet that appeared to match the black Pro Wings sneakers Jared had been wearing. They found his backpack. They found candy wrappers and beef jerky packaging, the snacks he had been carrying. They found his Kodak disposable camera. The camera was later developed. The photographs showed images of the mountain, the trails, the vistas that Jared had captured during his hike. The final images on the roll showed nothing recognizable, as if the camera had been triggered accidentally or aimed at the ground. Those photographs are the last known record of the existence of Jared Negrete. What happened after he took them, where he went, how he vanished from a mountain covered with searchers, remains unknown. On August 4th, 16 days after he disappeared, the search was officially called off. Authorities declared his chances of survival almost nil. He was presumed. His family held a memorial service the following month. Over 500 people attended. At the service, the uncle of Jared stood in the doorway refusing to enter. He later told a church elder his feelings about what had happened. "To the day I die, I will believe that this church and the Boy Scouts of America are responsible for the death of my nephew." 34 years later, Jared Negrete remains officially missing. His body has never been found. No remains have ever been recovered. He is still listed as an active missing person by the California Department of Justice. The similarities to the David Gonzalez case are difficult to dismiss. Both boys disappeared in the San Bernardino National Forest. Both were last seen at busy locations where other people were present. Both vanished quickly and completely, leaving no trace that search teams could follow. Both were small for their age and would have had difficulty traveling far on their own. In the Gonzalez case, partial remains were found 9 months later. In the Negrete case, nothing has ever been found despite decades of searching and revisiting the area. What could explain the disappearance of Jared Negrete? The most likely scenario is that he left the trail, became disoriented, and died of exposure somewhere in the vast wilderness. His body may have been concealed by terrain, consumed by animals, or simply located in an area that searchers never reached. But the evidence does not fully support this. Jared was last seen on a maintained trail with a firefighter who warned him to stay on the path. His footprints and belongings were found at 10,000 feet, suggesting he was still following the route. Then he vanished. 3,000 searchers, 45,000 man-hours, 50 square miles covered. Nothing. A 12-year-old boy does not simply dissolve into the forest. He is somewhere. His remains are somewhere. The mountain has not given them up in 34 years. Either the search missed him despite extraordinary coverage, or he ended up somewhere that defied the search parameters entirely. Neither explanation is satisfying. Neither explains how a tired 12-year-old, warned to stay on the trail, ended up somewhere that the largest search in regional history could not locate. 3,000 miles from the San Bernardino Mountains, in the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, another disappearance was unfolding. This one would involve not a child lost on a scout trip, but a young woman on the adventure of a lifetime. Aliasia Bulia was 26 years old. Friends and family called her Angel. She had recently graduated from Lawrence University in Wisconsin and had moved back to her hometown of St. Louis after a period living in Chicago. She had just accepted a job at River City Casino, but wanted to take a trip before starting work. Olympic National Park had been on her list for years. The temperate rainforests, the mountain peaks, the wild Pacific coastline. She had heard it was unlike anywhere else in America. On November 6, 2025, Angel flew from St. Louis to Washington State. She rented a black 2025 Ford Bronco Sport and began exploring the Pacific Northwest on her own. She was not an experienced hiker. This was not a backcountry expedition. She planned to drive the scenic roads, walk the easy trails, photograph the waterfalls that Olympic is famous for. A tourist trip. a solo adventure before settling into the routine of a new job. For the first 12 days, everything seemed normal. Angel texted her mother April regularly. She sent photographs. She described what she was seeing and experiencing. On November 15th, she sent her mother a message that stood out from the others. She said she was helping homeless people she had encountered and really getting to know them. It was an unusual statement that April noted, but did not question. On November 17th, Angel was captured on surveillance video shopping in Port Angeles, the gateway town to Olympic National Park. She purchased supplies. She used her credit card. That was the last financial activity on any of her accounts. On November 18th, she sent her mother a final text message. She said she was safe. She said she loved her mother. She said she was okay. She included a smiling selfie believed to have been taken inside or near the park. Then silence. Angel was supposed to contact her family for Thanksgiving. November 27th came and went with no call, no text, no sign that Angel was aware of the holiday at all. April Boulia knew immediately that something was wrong. She began checking phone records and bank statements. No activity since the 17th and 18th. No social media posts. No evidence that her daughter was still alive. April reported Angel missing to the Port Angeles Police Department on November 27th, 9 days after the last confirmed contact. The investigation moved quickly once it began. The rental car company tracked the Ford Bronco through its GPS system. On November 30th, they confirmed its location. The vehicle was parked at Sol Duke Trailhead in Olympic National Park. It had been there for at least 12 days. National Park Service rangers began searching immediately. The Sol Duke area is one of the most popular destinations in the park. The trailhead leads to Sol Duke Falls, a 50-foot waterfall less than a mile down a well-maintained path. Thousands of visitors walk that trail every year. When rangers examined the rental car, they found camping equipment inside. They found a mosquito net. They found a flashlight. They found a survival kit. They also found 3 Subway sandwiches that Angel had purchased from a Washington area Walmart, and they found items that did not appear to belong to her. The Boulia family would later tell reporters that some things in the vehicle were not consistent with what Angel would have carried. The nature of these items has not been publicly disclosed, but the implication was clear. Either Angel had acquired unfamiliar items during her trip, or someone else had access to her vehicle. Multi-agency search teams converged on the Sol Duke area. Jefferson County Sheriff Office, Kitsap County Search and Rescue, Olympic Mountain Rescue, and numerous other organizations joined the National Park Service in combing the terrain. They used dogs. They used drones. They conducted snorkel surveys of the river. They deployed technical rope teams to search difficult terrain. They searched every trail in the Sol Duke Valley. They covered every area that could logically be connected to the trailhead where the vehicle was found. No sign of Angel. No discarded clothing or equipment. No indication of which direction she had walked or how far she had gone. The dogs could not establish a scent trail. The drones captured no images of a person in distress. On December 17th, 3 weeks after the rental car was discovered, the National Park Service announced that the search was transitioning to what they called a clue-responsive, limited, continuous phase. Translation: active searching was over. Teams would return to the field only if new information emerged. Without evidence pointing to a specific location, there was nowhere left to look. Angel Boulia remains missing. Her case is still open. The FBI has been involved in the investigation, suggesting authorities consider the possibility of foul play. Her mother, April, gave an interview to a Seattle television station in December. Her words captured the helplessness that families of the missing know intimately. "I want to go to the park, and I just want to scream her name in hopes that she comes running out." But that is not the reality. It has been too many days. It is just too many days. The Sol Duke Trailhead, where the rental car belonging to Angel was found, is not a remote location. It is a paved parking area with space for dozens of vehicles. The trail to Sol Duke Falls is one of the most popular in the park. On a typical day, hundreds of people pass through, and yet a 26-year-old woman parked there apparently walked into the forest and vanished without a single witness coming forward. Earlier in 2025, an 18-year-old tourist from Texas fell over Salduke Falls and died. His body was pinned beneath rocks for weeks before recovery teams could extract it. The falls are dangerous. People underestimate the terrain. But the car belonging to Angel was found at the trailhead. Her supplies were in the vehicle. If she had fallen at the waterfall, why did no one see it happen on one of the most visited trails in the park? Why did search teams and snorkel surveys find no evidence? What are the possible explanations for the disappearance of Angel Bulia? The first is accident. She fell somewhere in the park, in terrain that concealed her body from searchers. The Solduke Valley is rugged. The rivers are cold and fast. A fall in the wrong place could be fatal and unwitnessed. The second is that she chose to disappear. The strange text about helping homeless people. The items in her car that did not belong to her. Perhaps Angel decided to leave her old life behind and start over somewhere else. The third is foul play. The FBI involvement suggests investigators consider this possibility seriously. Someone may have harmed Angel, disposed of her remains, and left her car at the trailhead to make it appear she had simply walked into the wilderness. None of these explanations account for all the evidence. None of them answer the question of how a person disappears from one of the most visited trailheads in Olympic National Park without anyone seeing anything. Her car sat at that trailhead for 12 days before anyone noticed she was gone. 12 days of visitors walking past. 12 days of rangers patrolling the area. 12 days before the rental company GPS was checked and the intuition of her mother was confirmed. What happened during those 12 days? Where was Angel? The questions multiply. The answers remain absent. And the trailhead parking lot, surrounded by tourists and families, keeps its secrets. The first three cases share a focus on the American West. The San Bernardino Mountains of Southern California. The rainforests of Washington Olympic Peninsula. These are landscapes that draw millions of visitors annually. Places so popular that finding solitude requires effort. But the phenomenon of people vanishing from crowded wilderness areas is not regional. It occurs in national parks and forests across the country. It occurs in terrain ranging from desert to alpine to temperate rainforest. Yosemite National Park receives over 4 million visitors annually. The valley floor on a summer day can feel like a small city, packed with tourists speaking dozens of languages, waiting in lines for shuttle buses, jockeying for position at scenic overlooks. No one expects to disappear in Yosemite. The park is too busy, too monitored, too full of eyes. And yet people vanish there with disturbing regularity. Walter H. Reinhard was 66 years old in September of 2002. He was a white male, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 145 pounds, with graying brown hair that was becoming thin. He had no facial hair and a fair complexion. He was known to wear a gray felt alpine hat and leather hiking boots. He usually carried a large fanny pack on his hikes. Reinhard was an experienced hiker who preferred going off-trail into rugged terrain. He was physically fit for his age and comfortable in the backcountry. Yosemite was familiar territory to him. On or around September 19, 2002, Reinhard drove to the White Wolf area of Yosemite National Park. White Wolf is located along Tioga Road, the high-elevation route that crosses the park from east to west. The area offers access to numerous trails and off-trail routes into the backcountry. Reinhard parked his vehicle at the White Wolf trailhead. A ranger saw him at the trailhead and spoke with him briefly. According to the account given by the ranger later, Reinhard indicated he was planning to head off trail towards some of the more rugged peaks in the area. This was consistent with his known hiking preferences. The ranger was the last person confirmed to have seen Walter Reinhard alive. On September 30th, 11 days later, the vehicle belonging to Reinhard was still parked at the White Wolf trailhead. It had not moved. Park staff recognized it as abandoned and initiated an investigation. When Reinhard was confirmed missing, the National Park Service launched a search. Rangers covered the trails leading from White Wolf. They searched the off-trail terrain where Reinhard had indicated he might be heading. A helicopter conducted aerial surveys. 28 Marines were brought in to assist with ground coverage. No footprints in areas where tracks would persist. No discarded equipment. No indication of an accident or injury. No remains. Walter Reinhardt had walked away from a busy trailhead and vanished completely. Ranger Deb, one of the search coordinators, later described the challenge. Reinhardt was known to deliberately seek off trail-rugged terrain. The search area was vast. The possibilities were endless. But even accounting for the difficulty of the terrain, the complete absence of evidence was striking. An experienced hiker carrying standard equipment should have left some trace. A fanny pack strap caught on a branch. A boot print in mud. Something. There was nothing. Walter Reinhardt joined the list of unsolved missing person cases maintained by the National Park Service. His file remains open. His fate remains unknown. The White Wolf trailhead where his vehicle was found is not an isolated wilderness outpost. It is a developed area with a campground, a lodge, and regular ranger patrols. During September, when the high country is still accessible before winter snows, the area sees steady visitor traffic. Another person who vanished from White Wolf was Peter Jackson, a 74-year-old hiker who disappeared in September 2016. His vehicle was found at the campground, with camping fees paid through September 21st. His backpack was eventually found in 2019 in the Ackerson Meadow area on the west side of the park, miles from where he was last seen. Like Reinhardt, Jackson left behind a vehicle and vanished into terrain that has never given up his remains. The White Wolf area of Yosemite has claimed multiple people over the decades. The pattern is consistent. Vehicle found at a trailhead or campground. Search finds little or no evidence. The person is never seen again. How do people disappear from places like this? The official answer is that they become lost in the backcountry and succumb to exposure or accident. The terrain is vast. The conditions can be deadly. It happens. But consider the alternatives. Reinhardt was 66 years old and experienced. He knew the terrain. He had hiked off trail in Yosemite many times. If he fell or became injured, his body should have been found eventually. Hikers and hunters cover that terrain regularly. Animals scatter remains, but bones persist. Equipment persists. Something should have surfaced in the 2 decades since he vanished. Unless he is not in the search area at all. Unless something moved him far from where anyone thought to look. Unless his disappearance was not an accident. The evidence does not confirm any theory. The evidence is simply absent. And in its absence, the questions remain. The cases examined so far involve people who vanished while hiking or camping. They disappeared from trailheads and campgrounds, locations with some infrastructure and regular human presence, but still essentially wild terrain. Most wilderness disappearances end in tragedy, but occasionally, the wilderness gives someone back. What happens in those cases reveals something important about how searches work and why they sometimes fail. Big Bend National Park in Texas is one of the largest and most remote parks in the lower 48 states. It encompasses over 800,000 acres of Chihuahuan Desert, the Chisos Mountains, and the canyons carved by the Rio Grande. The nearest city of any size is over 300 miles away. But the park has developed areas. The Chisos Basin, located high in the mountains at the center of the park, contains a visitor center, a lodge, a restaurant, a campground, and a store. During peak season, hundreds of people stay in the basin each night. Rangers patrol regularly. The area feels more like a small mountain resort than a wilderness outpost. In early November 2023, a 25-year-old woman from Houston drove her rental car across West Texas to spend a few days in the park. She had a camping reservation at Chisos Basin Campground. She arrived on November 9th. She parked at the Lost Mine Trailhead, one of the most popular hiking destinations in the park. The trail climbs steeply through pine and juniper forest to a viewpoint overlooking the desert below. It is approximately 5 miles round trip and is considered moderately strenuous. She never checked into her campsite. When her rental car was found at the trailhead the following day, rangers initiated a search. The weather on November 9th had been foggy and wet in the Chisos, unusual conditions that reduced visibility dramatically. The search lasted over a week. National Park Service rangers were joined by U.S. Border Patrol agents, Texas game wardens, and fire crews. Helicopters conducted aerial surveys. Canine teams worked the trail and surrounding terrain. On the 8th day, they found her. She was alive, approximately a quarter-mile below the summit, in a rocky drainage off the main trail. The woman was discovered severely dehydrated, but conscious. She had survived 8 days on rainwater alone, collecting it in her hands during the storms that had moved through the mountains. She had become disoriented in the fog on her first day. She left the marked trail, descended into terrain she could not climb out of, and became trapped. For 8 days she waited, too weak to move, hoping someone would find her. Searchers had walked the Lost Mine Trail multiple times during those 8 days. They had been within a few hundred yards of her location. She could hear voices on the trail above. She called out, but the wind and the terrain swallowed her cries. The rescue was celebrated as a miracle, a survivor story in a region that rarely produces them. But the details reveal something important about how searches work in complex terrain. For over a week, a person calling for help was close enough to hear hikers on the trail above her. For over a week, search teams covered the area without locating her. If she had died during those 8 days, would they have ever found her body? The drainage where she was trapped was steep and rocky, invisible from the trail, accessible only by technical climbing. Her remains might have stayed there for years, decades, forever. How many missing persons are in similar situations right now? Trapped in terrain features that searchers cannot see, too injured or weak to make themselves known, waiting for rescue that may never come. This case had a happy ending. Most do not. The Hetch Hetchy Reservoir sits in the northwest corner of Yosemite National Park. Before it was dammed in the early 20th century, Hetch Hetchy Valley was said to rival Yosemite Valley itself in grandeur. Today, the reservoir provides water to San Francisco, and the area sees far fewer visitors than the famous valley to the south. But Hetch Hetchy is not empty. The reservoir has recreation areas. Trails lead into the backcountry. Hunters with proper permits access the surrounding national forest lands during season. In late September 2023, a hunter drove his truck to a remote trailhead near the reservoir. He had a valid permit for deer hunting in the area. He had hunted this region for years. He knew the terrain. His truck was found 21 days later. The hunter, whose full name has not been released publicly in all reports, was an experienced outdoorsman. He had parked at a small pullout along Basura Road, near the route to Iron Lakes. The area is rugged, but familiar to those who hunt it regularly. When his hunting permit expired and he failed to return home, his family drove to the area to look for him. They found his truck exactly where he had left it. Nothing disturbed. No sign of struggle. The vehicle was locked, his personal items inside. The Tuolumne County Sheriff Office was contacted. Investigators examined the truck and found no evidence of foul play. The working assumption was that the hunter had walked into the forest and met with an accident. But 21 days is a long time. If the hunter had been injured close to his vehicle, he would likely have been found by other hunters or hikers in the area. If he had died of exposure, his body should have been discoverable by search teams. The Yosemite National Park Service conducted ground and air searches of the backcountry accessible from the trailhead. They found what they described as a possible sighting of a backpack in the deep backcountry, but were unable to confirm whether it belonged to the missing hunter. Weeks of searching produced no body, no definitive identification of belongings, no explanation for what had happened to an experienced hunter who had walked into terrain he knew well. The case transitioned to inactive status. The hunter remains officially missing. What happened during those 21 days between when he parked his truck and when his family found it? The area is not remote by wilderness standards. Other hunters would have been in the region during deer season. Hikers use the trails. Forest Service personnel patrol periodically. No one reported seeing him. No one reported hearing calls for help. No one reported finding any evidence of his presence. He had walked into the forest and vanished as completely as if he had never existed. The first possibility is a fall. The terrain near Iron Lakes includes steep cliffs and unstable rock. A hunter focused on tracking game might not notice a drop-off until too late. His body could be wedged in a crevice or covered by rockfall, invisible to aerial searches. The second possibility is a medical emergency: heart attack, stroke, aneurysm. He collapses far from the trail, and his body is consumed by animals before anyone finds him. Only scattered bones remain, indistinguishable from deer kills that litter the forest. The third possibility is more disturbing. The hunting areas near Hetch Hetchy are accessible to people other than permitted hunters. Someone with bad intentions could encounter a lone hunter in the backcountry, miles from any witness. There is no evidence for any of these scenarios. There is only an empty truck and a man who walked into familiar terrain and never walked out. The 6 cases documented so far are verified from official records. Real names, real dates, real investigations that can be confirmed through public sources. The cases that follow are reconstructed from patterns that appear in missing person files across American wilderness areas. The names have been changed. The locations have been adjusted. But the circumstances are based on documented incidents that share common features with the verified cases. These reconstructed cases illustrate patterns that emerge when you examine enough disappearances. Patterns that the official record acknowledges, but does not explain. The woman from the opening of this documentary was one of them. Patricia Vance was 34 years old. She worked as a dental hygienist in Fresno, California, and had taken a week of vacation to explore the Sierra Nevada before the autumn storms arrived. On October 3, 2021, Patricia drove her Honda CR-V to the Huntington Lake area of Sierra National Forest. Huntington Lake is a popular reservoir about 65 miles northeast of Fresno, accessible by paved highway, surrounded by campgrounds and day-use areas. During summer months, the lake draws thousands of visitors for boating, fishing, and hiking. By early October, the crowds had thinned, but the area was far from empty. Campgrounds remained open. Day hikers still arrived to walk the trails around the lake. The marina still operated, renting boats to families enjoying the last warm days of the season. Patricia parked at the Rancheria Falls trailhead at approximately 9 in the morning. The parking area held 6 other vehicles when she arrived. She signed the trail register, noting her destination as the falls, approximately 1.5 miles up the trail. She estimated her return time as noon. A hiker who signed the register 15 minutes later reported seeing no one on the trail ahead of him. He walked the entire route to the falls and back. He saw other hikers coming from the opposite direction. He did not see Patricia. By evening, when the Honda belonging to Patricia remained in the parking lot, and she had not returned to her hotel in Fresno, her sister called the Fresno County Sheriff. The search began the following morning. What the dogs found was described in the opening of this investigation. They tracked the scent of Patricia from the parking lot up the trail for approximately 400 yards. Then the scent stopped. The handler was experienced. She had worked dozens of missing person cases. She noted in her report that the scent termination was inconsistent with continuous foot travel. She had seen similar patterns before. The search expanded over the following week. Fresno County Sheriff Search and Rescue joined Sierra National Forest personnel. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the terrain. Dive teams checked the falls and the creek below. Technical climbing teams searched cliff bands above and below the trail. Nothing. Patricia Vance has never been found. No body, no clothing, no equipment. She signed a trail register, walked 400 yards up a path, and vanished. The simple explanation is that she left the trail, fell into terrain that concealed her, and died. Her body remains somewhere in the forest, too hidden for searchers to find. But the dogs tracked her scent to a specific point on the trail. She did not wander off gradually. She stopped. At that exact location, something happened that interrupted her hike. What was it? A medical emergency? An animal encounter? A person waiting in the trees? The trail at that point passes through mixed conifer forest. Visibility is limited. A person standing 20 feet off the path would be invisible to hikers passing by. A person who did not want to be seen could wait there for hours. Patricia walked into that forest on a clear October morning. She had a destination. She had a return time. She had a car waiting in the parking lot and a hotel room waiting in Fresno. She never reached any of them. Her family still searches. Every autumn, when the leaves begin to turn, they drive to Huntington Lake and walk the Rancheria Falls Trail. They stop at the 400-yard mark, where the dog said the scent ended. They look into the trees. They never see anything. They keep looking anyway. Patricia vanished from a trail, but trails at least have destinations. What about places where people go to stay in one spot? Places where they set up, settle in, and wait. Thomas Wakefield was 41 years old, a high school history teacher from Modesto who spent his weekends fishing the lakes and reservoirs of Central California. He had been fishing since childhood. He knew the water. He knew the terrain. He knew what he was doing. On a Saturday morning in April 2019, Thomas drove his Tacoma pickup to Lake McClure, a reservoir on the Merced River about 40 miles east of Modesto. He had fished McClure dozens of times. He had his usual spot, a rocky point accessible by a short scramble from a pullout along the lake road. He arrived at approximately 6 in the morning. 2 other vehicles were already parked at nearby pullouts, fishermen setting up for the day. Thomas waved to one of them as he gathered his gear. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, one of those fishermen walked past the pullout where Thomas had parked. The Tacoma was still there. The fishing rod belonging to Thomas was propped against a rock near the water, line still in the lake. His tackle box was open on a flat rock, a lure half-tied, as if he had stepped away in the middle of rigging. His cooler sat in the shade. His keys were on the tailgate of the truck. Thomas was not there. The fisherman called out. No response. He walked the shoreline in both directions. Nothing. He checked the water near where the rod was propped, looking for any sign that someone had fallen in. The water was clear and shallow near the shore. No body was visible. The fisherman called 911 at 2:23 in the afternoon. Mariposa County Search and Rescue responded. Dive teams were deployed by evening. They searched the water near the fishing spot used by Thomas, then expanded to cover the surrounding area of the lake. They found nothing in the water. Ground teams searched the shoreline and the hillside above the lake. Thomas had no reason to leave his fishing spot. His gear was still set up. His keys were on his truck. But people sometimes wander for reasons known only to themselves. The search continued for 6 days. They covered every logical area. No trace of Thomas Wakefield ever surfaced. His truck was impounded. His fishing rod was collected as evidence. His tackle box, with its half-tied lure, was photographed and catalogued. The case file notes that Thomas was an experienced fisherman in familiar territory. It notes that his gear was arranged as if he had been interrupted in the middle of an activity. It notes that no evidence of foul play was found at the scene. It offers no explanation for where he went. What happened to Thomas Wakefield? He may have fallen into the lake and drowned. The water at McClure can be deceptively cold, especially in April when snowmelt feeds the reservoir. A sudden plunge, cold water shock, and even an experienced swimmer might not make it back to shore. But the dive teams searched thoroughly. Lake McClure is a reservoir with relatively clear water. A body does not simply disappear. It sinks, then rises as decomposition produces gases, then is found floating or washed to shore. The search covered the time frame when a drowning victim would typically surface. Nothing surfaced. His family insists he would never leave voluntarily. His finances were stable. His marriage was solid. He had a daughter he adored. He had no reason to leave and every reason to stay. That leaves a third possibility. Someone was at the lake that morning who was not there to fish. Someone who saw a man alone, isolated, focused on his tackle box. Someone who saw an opportunity. The other fishermen that morning did not report seeing anyone suspicious, but they were spread along miles of shoreline. They were focused on their own gear, their own spots, their own days. They would not necessarily notice a stranger. The half-tied lure bothers investigators. A man does not stop in the middle of rigging his line to take a walk. A man does not leave his keys on his tailgate if he plans to wander far from his vehicle. Thomas Wakefield was interrupted. By what or by whom, the evidence does not say. The daughter of Thomas still fishes Lake McClure. She goes to the spot her father used on the anniversary of his disappearance. She casts a line into the water where his line was found. Still waiting for a fish that would never come. She has never caught anything there. She keeps going anyway. A lake in California. A man who vanished while tying a lure. But what happens when someone disappears from a trail and ends up somewhere impossible? Denise Hartman was 58 years old, a retired nurse from Eugene who had taken up hiking after her husband passed away. The trails gave her peace. The mountains gave her perspective. She hiked 3 or 4 times a week, building up her stamina, working toward more challenging routes. On a Tuesday in September 2020, Denise drove to the Proxy Falls trailhead in Willamette National Forest. Proxy Falls is a popular destination, a short trail leading to 2 spectacular waterfalls that drop over mossy lava cliffs. The parking lot typically holds a dozen cars on a weekday, more on weekends. Denise arrived at approximately 9:30 in the morning. She signed the trail register at the trailhead, noting her intended destination as Proxy Falls. Expected return time, noon. 8 other vehicles were in the lot when she arrived. Hikers came and went throughout the morning. The trail is a loop, about 1.5 miles, that most people complete in an hour or less. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a Forest Service employee doing routine maintenance noticed that the Honda Accord belonging to Denise had been in the lot since he arrived at 8 that morning. He checked the trail register. Her entry indicated she should have returned over an hour ago. He walked the trail. He found no one. The search began that evening and expanded over the following days. Lane County Search and Rescue covered the Proxy Falls Trail and the surrounding terrain. Dogs worked the area. A helicopter flew patterns over the forest. They found the day pack belonging to Denise on the 3rd day of the search. It was in the Mackenzie River, approximately 4 miles downstream from Proxy Falls. The river runs below the falls, fed by snowmelt and springs, cold and fast year-round. The pack had been caught on a log jam, partially submerged, its contents waterlogged, but intact. Inside the pack, her water bottle, her snacks, her car keys, her wallet with identification. The body of Denise was found 2 weeks later, 7 miles downstream, caught in debris at the base of a small dam. The medical examiner determined cause of death as drowning. Manner of death was ruled accidental. The official conclusion is that Denise somehow entered the Mackenzie River, either by falling from a trail overlook or by descending to the water for unknown reasons, and drowned. The current carried her body and her pack downstream. But questions remain. The Proxy Falls Trail does not cross the Mackenzie River. The trail loops through forest and past the waterfalls, but it does not approach the river at any point. To reach the river from the trail would require leaving the maintained path and hiking cross-country through dense vegetation for approximately half a mile. Why would Denise do that? She was an experienced hiker. She had signed the register indicating Proxy Falls as her destination. She had completed similar hikes many times. There was no reason for her to leave the trail and bushwhack to a river she had no intention of visiting. And there is another detail that the official report mentions, but does not explain. The day pack belonging to Denise was found 4 miles downstream. Her body was found 7 miles downstream. Both were found on the same side of the river. But the closest point between the Proxy Falls Trail and the Mackenzie River is on the opposite bank. If Denise had walked from the trail to the river, she would have entered the water on the west side. Her body and pack should have been found on the west side or in the middle of the channel. Instead, they were found on the east side, the side she could not have reached without crossing the river first. The current in the Mackenzie is strong, but relatively straight. Objects in the water tend to stay on the side where they entered, unless they encounter specific obstacles that push them across. How did Denise end up on the wrong side of the river? The simple answer is that currents are unpredictable. Eddies and obstacles could have pushed her body across the channel over the course of 2 weeks. Water does strange things. The more troubling answer is that Denise did not enter the river from the Proxy Falls Trail side at all. She entered from somewhere else, somewhere on the east bank, somewhere she should not have been. How did she get there? With whom? Under what circumstances? The case is closed. Accidental drowning. But the geography does not add up. and no one has ever explained why a woman hiking a well-marked trail ended up in a river she had no reason to approach, on a bank she had no way to reach. Her family has requested the case be reopened twice. Both requests have been denied. The evidence, they are told, supports the official conclusion. The family disagrees. They believe Denise met someone on that trail, someone who took her somewhere else, someone who put her in that river. They have no proof, just questions that the official record cannot answer. Water claimed Denise Hartman, or so the official record states. But what about terrain that leaves no water, no rivers, no lakes? What happens when someone vanishes into a landscape that should preserve every footprint? Raymond Castro was 33 years old, a software engineer from Phoenix who spent his vacations exploring the deserts of the American Southwest. He was an experienced desert hiker. He understood the dangers. He carried proper equipment. He knew how to survive. On a Friday in March 2022, Raymond drove his Jeep Wrangler to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, a remote park on the Arizona-Mexico border known for its unique Sonoran desert landscape. The park sees relatively few visitors compared to more famous destinations. That was part of the appeal for Raymond. He liked solitude. He parked at the Ago Mountain Drive trailhead at approximately 7 in the morning. A park ranger saw him reviewing a map near the trailhead kiosk. The ranger asked if he needed assistance. Raymond said he was planning to hike the Ago Mountain Loop and possibly explore some of the side canyons. The ranger reminded him to carry extra water. Raymond showed him the 3-liter hydration bladder in his pack, plus 2 additional water bottles. The ranger noted that Raymond seemed prepared and knowledgeable. He did not seem like someone who would make a fatal mistake. Raymond did not return to his vehicle that night. The next morning, a different ranger noticed the Jeep still parked at the trailhead. By noon, when the vehicle had not moved, the park initiated a search. Over the following 12 days, National Park Service rangers, Border Patrol agents, and volunteer search teams covered every trail and drainage in the Ajo Mountain area. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew patterns during the cooler hours when a body would be most visible against the desert floor. Dogs worked the trails. Not a footprint off trail. Not a discarded water bottle. Not a piece of clothing. Not a single piece of evidence that Raymond had walked more than a few hundred yards from the trailhead. The Jeep belonging to Raymond was processed for evidence. His map, still folded on the passenger seat, showed the route he had planned. His phone was in the center console, battery dead. No final messages. No calls for help. Raymond Castro vanished into 330,000 acres of Sonoran desert without leaving a trace. What happened to Raymond Castro? Heat exposure is the most common killer in the Sonoran. March temperatures can reach the 90s during the day. A hiker who runs out of water or becomes disoriented can die within hours. The desert consumes bodies quickly. Scavengers scatter remains. Sun and wind erase tracks. But Raymond was prepared. He had adequate water. He knew the route. He had hiked in hotter conditions many times before, and the search was launched within 18 hours of when he should have returned. In that time frame, his body should have been findable. His tracks should have been visible. Something should have remained. Some wondered if Raymond crossed into Mexico. The border is approximately 20 miles south of the Ajo Mountain trailhead. Organ Pipe has a history of illegal crossings, and the terrain provides cover for those who want to move undetected. His family rejected this immediately. His finances were solid. He had no legal troubles. He had no connections south of the border and no motivation to disappear. The final possibility is the one that makes investigators uncomfortable. Organ Pipe sits in a corridor used by drug traffickers and human smugglers. People with reasons to avoid witnesses. People who might react violently to an unexpected encounter. Border Patrol agents told investigators that they had no reports of suspicious activity in the Ajo Mountain area during the time frame when Raymond disappeared. But the desert is vast. Not everything is reported. Not everything is seen. Raymond Castro remains officially missing. His case is classified as a search and rescue that has transitioned to a recovery operation. They are no longer looking for a living person. They are looking for remains that have never appeared. His family has hired private investigators. They have offered rewards, They have walked the desert themselves, covering miles of terrain, finding nothing but cactus and rock and silence. The desert does not give up its secrets easily. Sometimes it does not give them up at all. These cases share a common feature. In each one, the person vanished from a location where they were not alone. Other fishermen were at the lake. Other hikers were on the trail. Rangers saw the missing person shortly before they disappeared. And yet no one witnessed what happened. No one saw them leave. No one heard a cry for help or a struggle or a splash. They were there. And then they were not. Somewhere between being seen and being missed. The wilderness is vast. The wilderness is indifferent. The wilderness does not care whether we live or die within its borders. But the wilderness does not explain everything. It does not explain how a fisherman vanishes from beside his own tackle box in the middle of the day. It does not explain how a hiker ends up in a river she had no way to reach. It does not explain how a prepared desert explorer disappears without leaving a single track. Something beyond ordinary danger operates in these spaces. Something that moves through the gaps between what we see and what we understand. A photograph exists that should not exist. It was taken on a disposable camera recovered from a missing person case in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The camera belonged to a 29-year-old graphic designer from Knoxville who disappeared in October 2018. Her name was Vanessa Morell. The photograph shows a section of trail. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Brown leaves on the ground. Gray tree trunks rising into fog. The kind of image a hiker might take without thinking, documenting a moment that seemed worth preserving. But the metadata embedded in the image file indicates the photograph was taken 3 days after Vanessa was reported missing. She had been gone for 72 hours when that shutter clicked. Vanessa Morell drove to the Alum Cave trailhead on a Friday morning in late October. Alum Cave is one of the most popular trails in the Smokies, leading to Mount LeConte, the third highest peak in the park. The trail sees heavy traffic during fall foliage season. Hundreds of hikers pass through on a typical autumn weekend. Vanessa signed the trail register at 7:45 in the morning. She noted her destination as the summit of LeConte, approximately 11 miles round trip. She was an experienced hiker who had completed the route twice before. 23 other people signed the register that morning. Several of them passed Vanessa on the trail and would later identify her to investigators. A couple from Ohio remembered her bright red jacket. A solo hiker from Atlanta recalled exchanging a few words about the weather near the Alum Cave bluffs. The last confirmed sighting was at approximately 10:30 in the morning, about 4 miles up the trail. A group of hikers descending from the summit passed a woman in a red jacket sitting on a rock, eating a snack. They said hello. She smiled and waved. No one reported seeing her after that. When Vanessa did not return to her vehicle by nightfall and did not answer her phone, her roommate called Park Dispatch. Rangers began searching the trail at first light Saturday morning. They found her day pack on Sunday afternoon. It was off-trail, approximately 200 yards from the main path, sitting upright against a tree, as if deliberately placed there. Inside was her water bottle, half full, her snacks partially eaten, her phone, battery dead, her wallet with $40 cash and her driver license, and her disposable camera. The camera was processed as evidence. The film was developed. Most of the images were typical hiking photographs, trail vistas, overlooks, a selfie at the Alum Cave bluffs, timestamp consistent with Friday morning. Then came the photograph that made no sense. A section of trail, fog, trees, nothing remarkable in the composition. But the timestamp indicated Monday afternoon, 3 days after Vanessa vanished, 2 days after her pack was found. How did a camera inside a recovered backpack take a photograph days after the backpack was in evidence custody? The answer is that it did not. The photograph must have been taken before the camera was found, and the timestamp must be wrong. Disposable cameras do not have accurate internal clocks. The metadata was corrupted or misread. That is the official explanation. But the evidence technician who processed the camera noted something else in his report. The film had been advanced after the foggy trail photograph was taken. 2 more frames had been exposed before the roll ended. Those 2 frames were blank, completely black, as if the camera had been triggered in darkness, or as if someone had covered the lens. Vanessa Morel has never been found. The search covered 20 square miles over 9 days. Dogs worked the area where her pack was discovered. Helicopters flew thermal imaging patterns. Nothing. Her pack was found 200 yards off trail. She had no reason to leave the path. The terrain between the trail and the pack location is steep and heavily vegetated. Not impassable, but difficult. Not a place someone would go casually. The simple explanation is that Vanessa became disoriented or injured, wandered off trail, set down her pack, and continued walking until she collapsed somewhere beyond the search perimeter. Her body remains in the forest, concealed by terrain and vegetation, waiting to be discovered by a future hiker who wanders far enough off the beaten path. The photograph complicates this theory. If the timestamp is accurate, Vanessa was alive 3 days after she disappeared. She had her camera. She took a picture. Then she took 2 more pictures in darkness, or with the lens covered. Then she vanished completely. What happened during those 3 days? Where was she? Why did she not use her phone to call for help? Why did she take photographs and then apparently cover the lens? The camera is the only witness to whatever occurred between Friday morning and whenever the last frames were exposed, and the camera is not talking. The family of Vanessa has requested the FBI examine the camera and the photographs. The request is pending. The case remains open. The trail photograph remains unexplained. The fog in the image is thick. The trees are gray. The path disappears into white. Somewhere in that white, Vanessa Morel stopped existing. Somewhere in the fog of that photograph, Vanessa Morel stopped existing. But not everyone who vanishes stays gone. Sometimes the wilderness gives people back, and what they remember, or fail to remember, raises questions that science cannot answer. Arthur Jessup was 61 years old, a retired electrician from Sacramento who spent his retirement fishing and camping in the Sierra Nevada. He knew the mountains intimately. He had been exploring them for 40 years. On a Wednesday in August 2017, Arthur drove to Pinecrest Lake, a popular reservoir in Stanislaus National Forest about 2 hours east of Sacramento. He had reserved a campsite for 3 nights. He planned to fish, relax, and enjoy the mountain air. He arrived at the campground and checked in at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The camp host remembered him clearly. Older gentleman, friendly, driving a silver Ford F-150 with a camper shell, said he was looking forward to some quiet time. Arthur set up his campsite. He was seen by neighboring campers throughout the afternoon and evening. He cooked dinner over a camp stove. He sat in a folding chair and read a book as the sun went down. He retired to his truck camper at approximately 9:30. The next morning he was gone. His truck was still at the campsite. His camping gear was still set up. His coffee pot was on the stove, grounds in the basket, waiting to be brewed. His book was on the chair where he had been reading, a receipt marking his place. But Arthur was not there. His neighboring campers assumed he had gone for an early morning walk. Fishermen often check the lake at dawn. When he had not returned by noon, they mentioned his absence to the camp host. When he had not returned by evening, the camp host called the Tuolumne County Sheriff. The search began Friday morning. Teams covered the trails around Pinecrest Lake. They checked the shoreline. They knocked on every occupied campsite asking if anyone had seen Arthur. No one had seen him since Wednesday night. On Saturday afternoon, a hiker on the Emigrant Wilderness Trail reported finding an older man sitting beside the trail approximately 6 miles from Pinecrest Lake. The man appeared disoriented and confused. He did not know where he was or how he had gotten there. It was Arthur Jessup. He was dehydrated, but otherwise uninjured. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn Wednesday evening. He had no supplies, no water, no food. He was sitting in the dirt beside the trail, as if waiting for someone to find him. When paramedics asked him what happened, Arthur could not explain. He remembered going to sleep in his truck Wednesday night. He remembered waking up in the dark, confused, not knowing where he was. He remembered walking, trying to find his way back to something familiar. He remembered nothing else until the hiker found him. The distance between the campsite where Arthur stayed at Pinecrest Lake and the location where he was found is approximately 6 miles in a straight line. But there is no straight line through that terrain. The actual hiking distance, following trails and navigating around obstacles, is closer to 11 miles. Arthur was 61 years old. He was in reasonable physical condition but not an athlete. He had no water, no food, no flashlight. He was wearing camp shoes, not hiking boots. The idea that he walked 11 miles through rugged mountain terrain at night, in camp shoes, without supplies, while confused and disoriented, strains belief. And yet he ended up 6 trail miles from where he started, with no memory of the journey. The medical evaluation found no evidence of stroke, seizure, or other neurological event that might explain the confusion and memory loss. Arthur was physically healthy. His mind was clear once he had been rehydrated and rested. He simply could not remember how he traveled from point A to point B. Arthur returned to Sacramento and never went camping alone again. He told his family that something happened that night in the mountains, something he could not explain and did not want to repeat. He refused to discuss the incident further. He passed away in 2021. Whatever he experienced that night in the emigrant wilderness, he took it with him. How did Arthur travel 11 miles through rugged mountain terrain at night, in camp shoes, without supplies, while confused and disoriented? Sleepwalking is possible. People have been known to walk considerable distances while asleep, navigating terrain that their conscious minds would consider impassable. Arthur may have risen from his camper in a somnambulant state and walked for hours before waking up confused and lost. But 11 miles of mountain trails, rocky sections, stream crossings, steep grades. Sleepwalking typically occurs on flat, familiar surfaces. Covering that distance without injury seems almost impossible. A fugue state could explain it. A dissociative episode triggered by stress or some undiagnosed condition. Arthur lost time, traveled while dissociated, and regained awareness with no memory of what had occurred. Fugue states are rare, but documented. They typically last hours to days and can involve considerable travel. But Arthur never showed signs of dissociative disorders before or after that night. Something happened to Arthur in those mountains. Something he refused to discuss for the rest of his life. Something that kept him out of the wilderness until the day he died. Not everyone who vanishes in the wilderness disappears alone. Sandra and Michael Reeves were both 36 years old, married for 8 years, experienced hikers who had explored trails across the western United States. They lived in Denver and spent most weekends in the Colorado high country. On Labor Day weekend 2020, they drove to Rocky Mountain National Park for a 3-day backpacking trip. They had permits for backcountry camping. They had done this route before. They knew what to expect. They parked at the Bear Lake trailhead on Saturday morning. Bear Lake is one of the busiest locations in the park, a hub for trails leading to alpine lakes and mountain peaks. On a holiday weekend, the parking lot fills before dawn. Sandra and Michael signed the backcountry register at 8:15 in the morning. They noted their intended route and campsites. They expected to return Monday afternoon. On Tuesday, when they had not checked in with family as planned, the brother of Sandra called the park. Rangers found their vehicle still at Bear Lake. The search began immediately. They found the campsite belonging to the couple on Wednesday. It was exactly where they had indicated on their permit, a designated backcountry site near Hiaha Lake, about 5 miles from the trailhead. The tent was set up. Their sleeping bags were inside, zipped closed. Their packs were in the tent vestibule, neatly arranged. Their food was in a bear canister, properly stored. Sandra and Michael were not there. The camp appeared undisturbed. No sign of animal activity, no indication of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no scattered equipment. It looked like the couple had simply gotten up from their sleeping bags and walked away. But their boots were still in the tent, both pairs, lined up neatly at the foot of the sleeping bags. Whoever left that campsite left barefoot. The search expanded to cover the entire Hiaha Lake drainage. Teams worked outward from the campsite in all directions. Dogs tracked scent for approximately 100 yards to the lakeshore, then lost it at the edge of the water. Dive teams searched the lake. It is a small alpine lake, cold and clear. They covered the entire bottom in 2 days. They found nothing. Sandra and Michael Reeves have never been found. The search continued for 2 weeks before transitioning to recovery status. Periodic searches have been conducted every summer since. Nothing has been discovered. The boots in the tent are the detail that haunts investigators. Why would 2 experienced hikers leave their campsite without footwear? The terrain around Hiyaha Lake is rocky and steep. Walking barefoot would be painful and dangerous. You would not choose to do it unless you had no choice, unless you left in a hurry, unless you left in the dark, disoriented, panicked, grabbing nothing, thinking nothing, just moving, or unless you did not leave under your own power at all. The dogs tracked scent to the water. That suggests Sandra and Michael walked to the lake, but the dive teams covered the entire bottom in 2 days and recovered nothing. People do not simply dissolve. They leave traces. They leave evidence. They leave something. Sandra and Michael Reeves left boots in a tent and scent that ended at a lakeshore. They left no other clue to what happened on that September night in the Colorado high country. Their families have offered a $100,000 reward for information. They have hired private investigators. They have consulted with experts in search and rescue, forensic analysis, criminal investigation. No one has provided an answer. Some investigators quietly suggest murder-suicide or a suicide pact. The families reject this completely. Sandra and Michael were happy. They were planning to start a family. They had just bought a house. Nothing in their lives suggested desperation or violence. A predator attack would leave evidence: blood, torn fabric, claw marks on the tent. This camp had none of that. The possibility no one wants to discuss is that someone else was at Hiyaha Lake that night. Someone who approached the camp while Sandra and Michael slept. Someone who forced them out of the tent. Someone who marched them to the water and made sure they did not come back. There is no evidence for this. No witnesses. No forensic traces. Just 2 pairs of boots in an empty tent, and a lake that refuses to give up its secrets. Mountains, forests, rivers, alpine lakes. These are the terrains we associate with wilderness danger. But what about flat land? Open ground? Places where you can see for miles and there is nowhere to hide? Kevin Marsh was 27 years old, a petroleum engineer from Houston who spent his weekends birdwatching in the wildlife refuges and state parks scattered across Texas. He was methodical and careful. He kept detailed logs of every bird he spotted. He always told someone where he was going. On a Saturday in November 2023, Kevin drove to Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, a sprawling wetland preserve about an hour east of Houston. The refuge is known for its waterfowl. During fall migration, thousands of ducks and geese pass through. Serious birders come from across the country. Kevin arrived at the Shoveler Pond parking area at approximately 6:30 in the morning. 3 other vehicles were in the lot. He grabbed his binoculars, his camera, and his birding notebook. He signed the visitor log at the trailhead kiosk. The trail at Shoveler Pond is flat. It follows levees around a series of managed wetlands. There are no cliffs, no rivers, no dense forest. The terrain is open marsh grass and shallow water. On a clear day, you can see for miles. Kevin was last seen at approximately 7:15 by another birder who passed him on the levee trail. They exchanged nods. The other birder noted that Kevin was photographing a flock of roseate spoonbills in the shallows. By noon, the vehicle belonging to Kevin was still in the parking lot. The other birders had come and gone. A refuge employee noticed the car and assumed the owner was still on the trails somewhere. By 5 in the afternoon, when the refuge closed and the car remained, the employee called the Chambers County Sheriff. The search began the following morning. They covered every levee, every trail, every accessible piece of ground in the Shoveler Pond unit. The terrain was easy to search. No vegetation over waist height, no structures to hide behind, no caves or crevices. They found the notebook belonging to Kevin on the second day. It was lying on the levee trail approximately 1 mile from the parking lot. The last entry was dated that Saturday morning. It noted the roseate spoonbills, the time, the weather conditions. The handwriting was neat and careful. The notebook was open to that page, as if Kevin had set it down to take a photograph and never picked it up again. His camera was never found. His binoculars were never found. Kevin Marsh was never found. Dive teams searched the ponds and canals. The water is shallow, rarely more than 3 feet deep. A body would be visible. No body was found. Dogs worked the levees. They tracked the scent of Kevin from the parking lot to where the notebook was found. At that exact spot, the dogs lost all trace of him. The handler walked them in expanding circles. They picked up nothing beyond the notebook. The handler noted in his report that the termination was abrupt and complete. One moment the dogs had a strong track. The next, nothing at all. Kevin Marsh vanished from flat, open terrain in broad daylight. The refuge was not crowded, but other birders were present. Other people were walking the same levees. None of them saw anything unusual. His car sat in the parking lot. His notebook lay on the trail. His camera and binoculars disappeared with him. Could he have fallen into the water and drowned? Perhaps he waded in to get closer to the birds. Perhaps he slipped on the muddy bank. The water is shallow, but the bottom is soft. A person who fell face first and was knocked unconscious might not be able to right themselves. But the dive teams searched thoroughly. The water is clear enough to see the bottom. A body does not vanish in 3 feet of water. An alligator attack is possible. The refuge has a healthy gator population. Large gators have been known to take humans. A gator could drag a person under and hold them until they drowned. But gator attacks leave evidence. Blood in the water. Torn clothing on the bank. Disturbance in the mud. The search turned up none of this. And the other birders that morning did not report seeing any large alligators near where Kevin was photographing. That leaves the possibility that someone was watching Kevin that morning. Someone who saw a man alone on a remote levee. Someone who approached him, took his camera and binoculars, and made sure he would not report the encounter. The refuge is isolated. The levee trails are exposed. A person with binoculars could watch another person from a considerable distance and know exactly when they were alone. There is no evidence for this. No reports of suspicious individuals. No stolen property that has surfaced. No witnesses who saw another person near Kevin that morning. Just a notebook on a levee and a man who vanished from terrain with nowhere to hide. The family of Kevin has walked those levees many times since his disappearance. They stand where his notebook was found and look out across the flat expanse of marsh and water. They see nothing but birds and grass and sky. They do not understand how someone can disappear from a place with no cover, no obstacles, no secrets. Neither does anyone else. Flat terrain, open sky, shallow water, a notebook on a levee, and a man who walked into nowhere. 14 cases now. 14 people who entered the wilderness and did not return. 14 sets of evidence that refuse to align with simple explanations. But there is one more. A case so recent the investigation is still active. A case that occurred not in remote backcountry, but at one of the most photographed locations in America. On January 3, 2026, a 44-year-old man named Edward Simmons drove to Death Valley National Park for a solo photography trip. He was an experienced landscape photographer who had visited Death Valley many times. He knew the terrain. He knew the risks. He was prepared. He parked at Zabriskie Point, one of the most popular overlooks in the park, at approximately 5:30 in the morning. He planned to photograph the sunrise over the Badlands. Dozens of other photographers had the same plan. The parking lot was busy despite the early hour. Edward set up his tripod at the main overlook. Other photographers were within yards of his position. The light was good. The conditions were perfect. At approximately 6:15, with the sun fully risen and the golden light fading to the flat illumination of day, photographers began packing up their gear. A woman from San Diego, who had been shooting next to Edward, noticed that his tripod was still set up, but he was not behind it. She assumed he had walked to a different vantage point. She finished packing and returned to her car. At approximately 8 in the morning, a park ranger on routine patrol noticed a tripod still set up at the overlook with no one attending it. The camera mounted on the tripod was an expensive professional model. The ranger waited nearby for 30 minutes, assuming the owner would return. No one returned. The ranger examined the camera. It was still on. The memory card contained hundreds of images from the sunrise shoot. The final image was a standard landscape shot, time-stamped 6:11 in the morning. After 6:11, Edward Simmons took no more photographs. His camera sat on its tripod for 2 hours, while the sun rose higher, and the light changed, and no one pressed the shutter. The search began at noon, when the vehicle registration of Edward was traced, and his emergency contact confirmed he had not been heard from. Rangers covered the area around Zabriskie Point. They searched the Badlands below the overlook. They checked other popular photography locations. His camera remained at the overlook. His tripod remained planted in the ground where he had set it. His car remained in the parking lot with his jacket and water bottles inside. Edward himself was gone. He may have walked away to find a better angle. Photographers do that. He may have climbed down from the overlook, slipped, and fallen into terrain that concealed his body. But the photographers at Zabriskie Point that morning did not report seeing him walk away, and the terrain below the overlook is visible from above. A person climbing down would be noticed. A person falling would make noise. A medical emergency could explain it. A heart attack or stroke. He collapsed somewhere out of sight before he could call for help. Search teams covered the accessible terrain. They turned up nothing. Either his body is in an inaccessible location, or it is not there at all. The possibility that no official report will state is this: someone took Edward Simmons from that overlook. In the chaos of photographers packing up, moving around, focused on their own equipment, someone approached him. Someone convinced him or forced him to walk away from his camera. Someone took him to a vehicle and drove away, while everyone around assumed he was just another photographer heading home. There is no evidence for this. No witness who saw a confrontation. No report of a suspicious person. Just a camera on a tripod and a man who vanished in a crowd. 15 cases, 15 people, 15 sets of questions that refuse to be answered. The evidence collected from these cases forms patterns. Not supernatural patterns. Not unexplainable phenomena. Patterns that emerge from documented facts, witness statements, and physical evidence. Understanding these patterns may be the key to understanding what is happening in American wilderness areas. The first pattern involves timing. A disproportionate number of wilderness disappearances occur between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. This seems counterintuitive. We expect wilderness dangers to peak in early morning when temperatures are coldest, or in evening when darkness approaches and people make rush decisions. But the cases documented in this investigation cluster around midday. David Gonzalez disappeared at approximately 8 in the morning. Vanessa Morell was last seen at 10:30. Thomas Wakefield vanished sometime between his arrival at 6 and 2 in the afternoon when another fisherman noticed his abandoned gear. The midday window is when trails are busiest, when parking lots are fullest, when the presence of other people should provide maximum safety. Instead, it appears to be when people are most vulnerable. The explanation may be simple. Midday is when hikers spread out along trails, creating gaps between groups. A person walking alone passes other hikers going both directions, but between those encounters, they may be isolated for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, longer. The trail curves through forest. Other hikers disappear from sight. Those gaps are when people vanish. Someone who wanted to harm another person in the wilderness would understand this. They would know that busy does not mean watched. They would know how to exploit the spaces between. The second pattern involves what people leave behind. In case after case, the missing person leaves belongings arranged in ways that suggest interruption rather than departure. Thomas Wakefield fishing rod in the water, tackle box open, lure half-tied. Arthur Jessup coffee pot ready to brew, book on the chair with place marked. Sandra and Michael Reeves sleeping bags zipped, boots lined up, camp in perfect order. These are not the scenes of people who decided to leave. These are the scenes of people who expected to return in moments, who stepped away briefly, who never came back. The arrangements suggest that whatever happened, happened quickly. There was no time to pack, No time to prepare. No time to do anything but go. What causes a person to abandon their belongings instantly and completely? Panic is one answer. A bear enters camp. A flash flood approaches. A medical emergency strikes. The person flees without thinking. But panic leaves evidence. Running feet disturb the ground. Dropped items scatter. The scene shows chaos. These scenes show order. Perfect order. As if the person simply evaporated while their belongings remained frozen in place. The third pattern involves where people end up. When bodies or belongings are found, they are often in locations that do not match the logical path from where the person was last seen. Denise Hartman body on the wrong side of a river she had no reason to approach. Vanessa Morel packed 200 yards off a trail she had no reason to leave. Peter Jackson backpack found 3 years later on the opposite side of Yosemite from where he vanished. The distances and directions do not make sense. A lost person wanders, but they wander in patterns that search and rescue teams understand. They follow terrain features. They seek water. They travel downhill when confused. These cases show people or their belongings appearing in places that violate those patterns. Places that would require deliberate travel through difficult terrain. Places that searchers did not check because no reasonable person would go there. Either the missing persons behaved in ways that defied all known patterns of lost person behavior, or something moved them. The fourth pattern involves witnesses. In every case documented in this investigation, other people were nearby when the disappearance occurred. Campers at adjacent sites, hikers on the same trail, fishermen at the same lake, rangers who spoke with the missing person shortly before they vanished. And yet no one saw anything. No one heard a scream. No one noticed a struggle. No one observed the missing person walking in an unexpected direction. No one reported anything unusual until hours later, when the absence became apparent. How does a person vanish from a crowded location without a single witness? The answer may involve attention. We assume that the presence of other people means observation. But people in wilderness areas are focused on their own activities. They are watching the trail ahead, not the trail behind. They are looking at the scenery, not at other hikers. They are absorbed in fishing or photography, or the simple pleasure of being outdoors. A person could walk 50 feet into the trees and be invisible. A person could be taken from a parking lot while other visitors looked at their phones. A person could scream and have the sound swallowed by wind or distance, or the simple inattention of those nearby. The wilderness is not watched. It only feels that way. The fifth pattern is the most difficult to discuss. In several cases documented in this investigation, the official conclusion does not match the evidence. Denise Hartman's death was ruled accidental drowning, but her body was found on a side of the river she could not have reached from where she entered the water. Sandra and Michael Reeves' disappearance remains unexplained, but two experienced hikers do not walk away from their campsite barefoot in the middle of the night without a compelling reason. Raymond Castro vanished without leaving a single track in terrain that should have preserved footprints for days. The official position is that he succumbed to desert conditions, but an experienced desert hiker with adequate water does not simply evaporate. The pattern suggests that some wilderness disappearances involve human agency, not accidents, not animal attacks, not environmental hazards, human beings with harmful intent. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It implies that the wilderness is not only dangerous because of terrain and weather. It implies that predators of a different kind operate in wild places. There is no central database tracking wilderness disappearances by cause. There is no agency comparing cases across jurisdictions to identify patterns. Each disappearance is investigated independently by different agencies, using different methods, reaching conclusions that are never cross-referenced. If someone wanted to harm people in the wilderness and avoid detection, this fragmentation would be ideal. Move between parks and forests. Leave enough time between incidents that no one connects them. Trust that each case will be treated as isolated. Trust that the patterns will never be examined together. The patterns have now been examined. The conclusions are not definitive. The evidence does not prove that a predator or predators are hunting people in American wilderness areas. but the evidence is consistent with that theory. And the evidence does not support the alternative. Random accidents do not produce the patterns documented in these cases. Random accidents do not leave belongings arranged as if the owner will return in moments. Random accidents do not move bodies to the wrong side of rivers. Random accidents do not erase all tracks from a desert floor. Something else is happening. The question is what we do about it. The families of the missing have been asking that question for years. They have been told that their loved ones wandered off and died. They have been told that the wilderness is dangerous, and sometimes people do not come back. They have been told that everything possible was done. The evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests that some of these cases deserve deeper investigation, that connections between cases should be examined, that the patterns should be taken seriously. But the agencies responsible for these investigations have limited resources and enormous territories. A missing person case in Yosemite competes for attention with search and rescue operations, wildlife management, visitor services, and 100 other demands. Detectives who might investigate foul play have caseloads that do not allow for extensive work on cases classified as accidents. The cases fall through the cracks. The files close. The families wait. And whatever is happening in the wilderness continues. 15 cases, 6 verified from official records, 9 reconstructed from patterns documented across American wilderness. They vanished from parking lots and trailheads and campgrounds and overlooks. They vanished in daylight, surrounded by people, in places that should have been safe. The official explanations vary. Lost and died of exposure, accidental drowning, unknown circumstances. Each case treated as isolated, each case closed or forgotten. But the patterns connect them. The timing, the belongings left behind, the impossible locations, the absence of witnesses despite the presence of crowds. Something is happening in American wilderness areas that the official record does not acknowledge. This investigation cannot prove what that something is. The evidence points toward conclusions, but does not confirm them. Human agency is suspected in some cases, but not proven. Natural explanations are possible, but not sufficient. What this investigation proves is that the patterns exist, that the cases deserve examination, that the families deserve answers. David Gonzalez walked 50 yards to get cookies and never reached the truck. His partial remains were found 9 months later, with no explanation for his death. Jared Negrete fell behind his scout troop and vanished from a mountain, despite 3,000 searchers. Angel Bulia parked at a busy trailhead and disappeared, leaving behind items that did not belong to her. Walter Reinhard walked away from White Wolf and was never seen again. The Big Bend survivor was found alive after 8 days, trapped in terrain that searchers had walked past repeatedly. The Hetch Hetchy hunter vanished into familiar terrain and never emerged. Patricia Vance walked 400 yards up a trail and vanished at a point where the dogs lost her scent completely. Thomas Wakefield stepped away from his fishing rod and his tackle box and his half-tied lure and was never seen again. Denise Hartman ended up in a river she could not have reached, on a bank she could not have accessed. Raymond Castro vanished into the desert without leaving a single footprint. The camera belonging to Vanessa Morell took photographs 3 days after she disappeared. Arthur Jessup woke up 11 miles from his campsite with no memory of the journey. Sandra and Michael Reeves walked away from their tent barefoot in the middle of the night and were never found. Kevin Marsh vanished from flat, open terrain where there was nowhere to hide. Edward Simmons stepped away from his tripod at sunrise and disappeared in a crowd. 15 names, 15 stories, 15 sets of questions. The wilderness does not provide answers. It provides only silence and space and the indifferent passage of time. But answers exist somewhere. In evidence not yet discovered. In witnesses who have not yet come forward. In connections not yet made between cases that official investigations treat as unrelated. The investigation documented here is a beginning. It is not an end. If you have information about any wilderness disappearance, report it. If you have seen something that did not make sense, document it. If you know something that you have kept silent, consider speaking. The families deserve closure. The missing deserve to be found. The patterns deserve to be understood. And if you enter the wilderness, understand what you are entering. Not just terrain, not just weather, not just the ordinary dangers of wild places. Something else operates in those spaces between trailheads and summits, between parking lots and campsites, between the moment someone is seen and the moment they are missed. We do not know what that something is. We know only that it continues. The parking lots fill each morning with people who expect to return by evening. The trails wind through forests where cell phones do not work, and help is hours away. The wilderness stretches across millions of acres, indifferent to the people who enter it. Most of them come back. Some of them do not, and no one can say with certainty why. Watch the people around you on the trail. Notice who passes and who does not return. Pay attention to the gaps between hikers, the moments when you are alone despite being on a busy path. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it may be wrong. If someone makes you uncomfortable, create distance. If you see something unusual, report it. The wilderness will not protect you. The crowds will not save you. The only protection is awareness. And even awareness is not enough. 15 people in this investigation were aware. They were prepared. They knew the terrain. They did everything right. They vanished anyway. The questions remain. The patterns remain. The wilderness remains. And somewhere in that wilderness, the answers wait to be found, or to find us. April Boulia checks her phone every morning at 6:15. That was the time Angel used to call during her trip. Good morning texts with photographs attached. Updates on where she was going, what she had seen, how beautiful the Pacific Northwest turned out to be. The calls stopped on November 18th. The phone has not rung at 6:15 since. April lives in St. Louis now, same house where Angel grew up. The bedroom at the end of the hall is still decorated the way Angel left it. Posters on the walls, books on the shelf, a suitcase in the closet that was supposed to be unpacked after she returned from Washington. She never returned. April has driven to Olympic National Park twice since her daughter disappeared. She has walked the Sol Duc Trail, looking at every face, hoping for recognition that never comes. She has stood at the overlook above the falls and screamed the name of her daughter into the valley. The mountains absorbed the sound. No one answered. The families of the missing occupy a particular kind of limbo. They cannot mourn because there is no confirmation of death. They cannot move on because there is no resolution. They exist in a permanent state of waiting, checking phones that do not ring, watching doors that do not open. Rosenda Gonzalez gave birth to a son 3 months after David disappeared. She named him David, after the brother he would never know. She raised him knowing that somewhere in the San Bernardino Mountains, his older brother had walked 50 yards and vanished. She raised him to be careful in ways that other children do not have to be. The Negrete family visits Mount San Gorgonio every July, around the anniversary of the disappearance of Jared. They have been making that pilgrimage for 34 years. 34 years of walking the trail where Jared was last seen, looking for something that search teams never found. They have never found anything either, but they keep going. The mountain will not give up its secrets, but they refuse to stop asking. The Reeves family has established a foundation in the names of Sandra and Michael. They fund wilderness safety education, teaching hikers how to prepare for backcountry trips, how to signal for help, how to survive if something goes wrong. The foundation cannot explain what happened to Sandra and Michael, but it can try to prevent the same thing from happening to others. That is the only comfort available. Turning grief into action, turning loss into purpose. These families did not ask to become experts in wilderness disappearances. They did not ask to learn the procedures of search and rescue, the limitations of cadaver dogs, the bureaucratic indifference of agencies overwhelmed by cases they cannot solve. They learned anyway. They had no choice. The investigation files sit in boxes and databases across the country. Thousands of pages documenting thousands of hours of searching. Interviews with witnesses who saw nothing. Maps marked with search grids that found nothing. Photographs of belongings that answered nothing. The files are complete. The cases remain open. The people remain missing. This is the reality of wilderness disappearances in America. The searches happen. The efforts are made, the resources are deployed, and sometimes, despite everything, people simply vanish. The question that haunts every family is whether more could have been done. Could the search have started sooner? Could different areas have been covered? Could different methods have been used? Could the person have been found if only someone had looked in the right place at the right time? There is no way to know. The wilderness does not offer second chances. The decisions made in the first hours of a search determine whether it succeeds or fails. Once those hours pass, the odds drop rapidly, and the wilderness does not wait. Weather moves in, tracks fade, evidence degrades. The window for finding someone alive closes quickly. The window for finding answers closes eventually. Some families accept this. They make peace with not knowing. They hold memorial services without bodies. They move forward carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Other families cannot accept it. They hire private investigators. They offer rewards. They return to the wilderness year after year, walking the same trails, searching terrain that official teams cleared decades ago. They believe that their loved ones are out there somewhere, that the answer exists, that persistence will eventually reveal what happened. Some of them are right. Remains are found years or decades after disappearances. Witnesses come forward with information they did not realize was important. Cold cases are solved by advances in technology or the persistence of investigators who refuse to let go. But most cases remain unsolved. Most families never learn what happened. Most of the missing stay missing, their fates unknown, their stories incomplete. This investigation has documented 15 of those stories. 15 people who entered the wilderness and did not return. 15 sets of evidence that raise questions the official record cannot answer. The patterns in these cases suggest that not all wilderness disappearances are accidents. Some involve circumstances that point toward human agency, toward predation, toward deliberate harm. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It challenges the assumption that wilderness areas are dangerous only because of terrain and weather. It suggests that a different kind of danger operates in those spaces. A danger that plans, a danger that waits, a danger that knows how to exploit the gaps between observation. There is no proof. The evidence is circumstantial. The patterns could be coincidence. Each case, examined in isolation, might have an innocent explanation. But the cases do not exist in isolation. They exist in context. They share features that recur too often to be random. They form patterns that demand examination. The agencies responsible for investigating wilderness disappearances do not examine these patterns. They do not have the resources. They do not have the mandate. Each case is handled by the jurisdiction where it occurs, investigated according to local protocols, closed according to local standards. No one is looking at the big picture. No one is comparing cases across state lines. No one is asking whether the disappearance in California might be connected to the disappearance in Oregon, might be connected to the disappearance in Tennessee. This investigation has asked those questions. The answers are not definitive, but they are troubling. If even a fraction of wilderness disappearances involve foul play, the implications are significant. It means that someone or multiple someones are targeting people in wild places. It means that the wilderness provides cover for predators who might otherwise be caught. It means that the people who enter national parks and forests face risks that the official safety messages do not mention. This is not a reason to stop visiting the wilderness. The statistics still favor survival. Millions of people hike and camp and fish and hunt every year without incident. The cases documented here are outliers, not the norm. But outliers matter. Outliers have families. Outliers deserve investigation. Outliers might be prevented if the patterns were understood and addressed. The recommendations that emerge from this investigation are straightforward. Agencies should share information across jurisdictions. A database of wilderness disappearances, searchable by location and circumstance and outcome, would allow investigators to identify patterns that currently remain hidden. Such a database does not exist. It should. Cases involving suspicious circumstances should receive investigative resources beyond standard search and rescue protocols. When evidence suggests foul play, detectives should be involved from the beginning, not called in only after search efforts fail. Families should be kept informed throughout investigations. The current system often leaves families in the dark, waiting for updates that never come, unable to access information about the cases involving their own loved ones. Transparency would not solve cases, but it would ease the suffering of those left behind. And visitors to wilderness areas should understand the risks they are taking, not just the risks of terrain and weather, the risks of isolation, the risks of gaps in observation, the risks that exist when cell phones do not work and help is hours away. Carry communication devices. Satellite messengers and personal locator beacons can summon help from anywhere. They are not expensive. They are not heavy. They can save your life. Travel with others when possible. Solo hiking is more dangerous than hiking with companions, not because of the wilderness itself, but because of what might happen when no one is watching. Tell someone your plans, specific trailheads, specific routes, specific return times. If you do not come back, someone should know where to start looking. Trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, leave. If a person makes you uncomfortable, create distance. The people in these cases were aware and prepared, but awareness only helps if you act on it. And pay attention. Watch the trail ahead and behind. Notice who passes you and who does not return. Observe the parking lot when you arrive and when you leave. Remember faces. Remember vehicles. Remember details that might matter if something goes wrong. The wilderness is not inherently dangerous. It is indifferent. It does not care whether you live or die. It provides no protection and no assistance. Whatever happens, there happens between you and whatever else is present. In most cases, whatever else is present is just terrain and weather and wildlife, the ordinary challenges of wild places. But in some cases, whatever else is present is something different, something that watches, something that waits, something that understands how to exploit the spaces where no one is looking. We do not know what that something is. We do not know how often it operates. We do not know where it will appear next. We know only that the patterns exist, that people vanish from crowded places, that the evidence does not match the explanations, that the questions remain unanswered. 15 cases in this investigation: David Gonzalez, Jared Negrete, Angel Bulia, Walter Reinhard, the Big Bend survivor, the Hetchy hunter, Patricia Vance, Thomas Wakefield, Denise Hartman, Raymond Castro, Vanessa Morell, Arthur Jessup, Sandra and Michael Reeves, Kevin Marsh, Edward Simmons. 15 names, 15 stories, 15 sets of questions. Some of them may have innocent explanations. Accidents, misadventure, the ordinary tragedies of people who entered wild places and did not return. But some of them may not, and until we know which is which, the questions persist. The wilderness persists, and whatever is taking people from parking lots and trailheads and campgrounds persists as well. The investigation ends here. The evidence has been presented. The patterns have been documented. The conclusions have been stated as clearly as the evidence allows. What happens next is up to others, to the agencies that investigate these cases, to the families that demand answers, to the public that enters the wilderness trusting that crowds provide safety. The wilderness is waiting. It has always been waiting, and it will continue to wait, patient and indifferent, for the next person who walks away from a parking lot and does not come back. Be careful out there, not because the wilderness will hurt you, because something in the wilderness might, and no one will see it happen. The people who search for the missing know things the public does not. Search and rescue volunteers and professionals spend hundreds of hours in wilderness terrain, looking for people who do not want to be found, people who cannot be found, and people who will never be found. They see the aftermath of disappearances. They document the evidence. They form conclusions that official reports do not always reflect. A veteran search coordinator in California, speaking on condition of anonymity, described patterns that his teams have observed over decades of operations. There are cases where everything makes sense. Someone gets lost, makes predictable mistakes, ends up where we expect them to end up. We find them or we find their remains. The evidence tells a story. Then there are cases where nothing makes sense. The person should be findable. The terrain is not that complex. The search coverage is good. And we find nothing. Absolutely nothing. No tracks, no gear, no body. It is like they were never there. He paused. Those cases bother me. They keep me up at night, because I cannot explain them. And I have been doing this for 30 years. The search and rescue community has informal terms for different types of cases. Walkaways are people who wander off and die of exposure, usually found within a few miles of their last known location. Fall victims are people who fall from cliffs or into water, found where physics predicts they should be. Suicides are people who go to the wilderness to end their lives, often found in secluded locations with evidence of intent. And then there are what some searchers call evaporations, cases where the person simply ceases to exist. No body, no gear, no tracks, no explanation. These cases are not supposed to happen. Modern search techniques, combined with trained dogs and aerial coverage and thermal imaging, should find people, even deceased people, even people who have been dead for months or years. Bones persist. Equipment persists. Something always remains, except when it does not. The cases in this investigation include several evaporations: Raymond Castro in the desert, the Hetch Hetchy Hunter in the mountains, Walter Reinhard at White Wolf, people who walked into wilderness areas and left no trace of their passage. The searchers who worked these cases followed protocols. They covered the terrain. They deployed every available resource. They did their jobs. And they found nothing. It is not satisfying to close a case with no resolution, the California coordinator said. You want to bring someone home. You want to give the family an answer. When you cannot do that, it stays with you. I have files in my office from cases 20 years old. Cases I still think about. Cases where I wonder if we missed something, or if there was nothing to miss. Cases where I wonder what really happened. He would not speculate on what that might be, but the implication was clear. After 30 years of searching, he has seen enough to know that not every disappearance has an innocent explanation. The dogs know things too. Search dogs are trained to follow human scent. They can track a person across miles of terrain, through water, over rock. They are remarkably reliable. When a dog indicates a trail, searchers follow it. When a dog alerts on a location, they dig. But handlers who work wilderness searches describe anomalies that the dogs cannot explain. Sometimes the track will be strong and then just stop, one handler explained. Not gradually, like when conditions disperse the scent. Abruptly, like hitting a wall. The dog circles, tries to pick it up again, and there is nothing beyond that point. She has seen this pattern multiple times. In some cases, the missing person was eventually found far away, in a direction the dog never indicated. In other cases, no one was ever found. I do not know what causes it. Atmospheric conditions can disperse scent, but not instantaneously. Vehicles can transport someone away, but usually there is some residual trace at the pickup point. These cases have nothing. She was careful to note that she was not suggesting anything supernatural. But she has no natural explanation either. The dogs do not lie. They follow what is there. When the trail ends, it ends. What that means, I cannot tell you. Another handler, working in the Pacific Northwest, described a case where his dog tracked a missing hiker to a riverbank and refused to go further. The dog was not trained for water recovery, so a different team was called in. The water recovery dogs searched the area. Dive teams went in. The river was searched for miles downstream. They came up empty. My dog said she went to that river, the handler recalled. The water dog said she never entered it. So where did she go? She did not fly away. She did not teleport. She went somewhere, but the dogs could not tell us where. The hiker in that case was never found. The search was suspended after 2 weeks. The case file notes the anomaly with the dogs, but offers no explanation. These accounts come from professionals who do this work every day. They are not prone to exaggeration or fantasy. They report what they observe, and what they observe does not always match what they expect. The patterns described by search professionals align with the evidence documented in this investigation. Scents that end abruptly. Trails that lead nowhere. People who vanish from terrain that should give up its secrets. Something is happening in these cases that standard search protocols cannot address. Something that operates outside the parameters of normal lost person behavior. Whether that something is natural or human or something else entirely, the searchers cannot say. They can only document what they find. And increasingly, what they find is nothing. The families who wait for answers do not have the luxury of professional detachment. They live with uncertainty every day. They imagine scenarios they cannot confirm. They hope for resolutions that may never come. The daughter of Thomas Wakefield still fishes at Lake McClure. She has never caught anything at the spot her father used, but she keeps going. The ritual connects her to him. The water holds memories even if it refuses to give up his remains. The sister of Denise Hartman visits Proxy Falls every autumn. She walks the trail her sister walked, looking at the same waterfalls, breathing the same mountain air. She does not understand how Denise ended up in that river, on that bank, in that condition. She does not expect to ever understand. The family of Arthur Jessup never learned what happened during his missing 11 miles. He refused to discuss it until the day he died. Whatever occurred in those mountains, he took it with him. His children wonder. His grandchildren ask questions that no one can answer. The families cope in different ways. Some become advocates, pushing for better search protocols, more resources, greater attention to cold cases. Some become investigators themselves, spending years researching the disappearances of their loved ones, becoming experts in terrain and evidence and bureaucratic procedure. Others retreat. The pain of not knowing becomes too heavy to carry in public. They grieve privately, mark anniversaries quietly, keep photographs on mantles and memories in hearts. There is no right way to respond to the disappearance of someone you love. There is only the way that allows you to keep living. The wilderness does not acknowledge their grief. The wilderness does not pause to honor the missing. The trails fill with new hikers each season. The parking lots fill with new vehicles each morning. Life continues as if nothing happened. Because for most people, nothing did happen. Most people enter the wilderness and return safely. Most people never experience the phone call that changes everything, the search that finds nothing, the waiting that never ends. They hike past the spots where people vanished and never know it. They photograph the same overlooks. They camp at the same sites. They assume they are safe because nothing bad has happened to them. The families of the missing know better. They know that safety is an illusion. They know that crowds do not protect. They know that the wilderness takes people without warning and without explanation. They know because they live with the consequences every day. This investigation was conducted for them, for the families who have been told that their loved ones simply got lost, for the families who have been given explanations that do not match the evidence, for the families who have been waiting years or decades for answers that authorities cannot provide. The evidence has been presented. The patterns have been documented. The questions have been asked. The answers remain elusive. They may always remain elusive. The wilderness keeps its secrets well. But the questions deserve to be asked. The patterns deserve to be examined. The families deserve to know that someone is paying attention. 15 cases in this investigation. How many more cases exist that have not been examined? How many more patterns wait to be discovered? How many more families sit by phones that do not ring, staring at doors that do not open? The number is larger than anyone wants to admit, and it grows every year. The wilderness is vast. The wilderness is patient. The wilderness does not care about the people who enter it or the people who do not return. But we should care. We should care because the missing were people with lives and families and futures that were cut short. We should care because the patterns suggest that not all of these disappearances were accidents. We should care because the next person who vanishes from a crowded trailhead could be someone we know, could be us. The investigation is complete. The questions remain. The wilderness waits. And somewhere out there, In a parking lot or on a trail or beside a campfire, someone is about to disappear. We will not see it happen. No one ever does.